This is Paul Schneiderman today on the 105th edition of the Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio with my special guest is Seattle Mariners clubhouse reporter on 710 ESPN Seattle, Shannon Drayer. Hey, Lucius, I can't see Shannon. Okay, thanks. Shannon has graciously come back on my podcast for the second time. I last had Shannon as a guest on the 62nd edition back in late 2019. As I mentioned to Shannon before the show started, the world has changed a bit since then, for sure. Well, Shannon is a great authority on about everything involving Seattle Mariners baseball and Major League Baseball in general. I thought it'd be fun to catch up with Shannon a little bit and get her thoughts on the Mariners offseason and a whole host of issues today. And my podcast, formerly Sports and Stuff, is now Sports Untold, and my podcast is now on Amazon, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and other outlets. Shannon, I appreciate you coming back on Sports Untold on Rainier Avenue Radio.
No problem.
Great. Well, Shannon, I didn't ask you this question last time you were on, but I thought it'd be a fun question to ask you, is can you tell us about your first ever interview as a clubhouse reporter, and how did it go?
I can't. I have no idea. A very early one, I mean, it's a long time ago, an early one that has just a fantastic ending and kind of an epilogue to it, too. When I started out, if you know my history, I did not go to school for this. I won a contest, and I basically worked my way up into what I'm doing. Got my break, prepared myself for if that break ever happened, and by some miracle, it did. I was with KJR at the time, and they started me off very slow, and they had me doing updates for John Clayton, just like 4 hours a week, and that was it. And my ultimate goal was to get into baseball. I just wanted to get as close to the game as possible. And after being there for about a year, they started taking me to the park with them. And I was basically like a production assistant on their post-game show. And they eventually let me go into the clubhouse, and it was always with someone. And the first time they sent me into a clubhouse alone to get sound and to ask some questions, it was into an opposing clubhouse. And this is at the Kingdom. And it was a game that the Mariners had played against the Texas Rangers. And so I went into the opposing clubhouse ready to talk to someone. I wasn't quite sure, got in there, and these were not the big luxury clubhouses that they have now. It was just a bunch of lockers and chaos in basically a closet. It was kind of nightmarish, to tell you the truth. And you get in, and the first thing I notice is everybody's got their jerseys off, so I don't know who anybody is. I don't have names on the back or numbers or anything like that. So I do a quick look around. Who do I recognize? Ivan Rodriguez, Pudge. I know him. And he does have some reporters that are around him. So I go around, and I'm in the group, and I'm listening, and I put the microphone in. I've got the Marantz that is the size of a shoebox. We now record everything on phones and things of similar size. And, we had a strap of it was like carrying a purse, basically, the Marantz, and big, bulky microphone. I stick that in there. And reporters are asking questions, and I'm listening. I'm getting the sound, and I realize I need to ask some questions, too. And I start to ask Pudge a question, and I get cut off by another reporter. And so I'm like, okay, this is how it is. So I listen to the answer, and I'm like, my turn. And I start to ask the question again. That same reporter cuts me off again. And I'm a little rattled by this at this point.
Sure.
And this is not good. And so again, patiently listen, start to ask for a third time, cut off by the same reporter again. At this point, I'm thinking, I can't do this job. I'm not aggressive enough. I'm getting walked all over with. And the next thing I know, Ivan looks up at that reporter, and I don't know if you've ever been close to him or seen him. He's got an intensity to him. He's got laser, just his eyes can just just absolutely bore through a person. Looks up at the guy and says, "The lady is speaking." And I took a deep breath, and I'm like, wow. And so I asked my question, and I'm very thankful, and I get out of the clubhouse. And it was a pivotal point, because I was ready to turn around and walk out. I was not sure I could do this at that point. And years later, it was in Ivan's final year in playing in the big leagues. he was sitting in the opposing dugout at then Safeco Field, and I saw him, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go tell him what that meant to me. And this is at least 10 years later. And I went over and I sat next to him, asked if he had a minute, and he said, sure. And I told him, I'm sure you don't remember this, but this meant everything to me. And I relayed the story to him. And he smiled and he said, and, how are you doing now? He asked, what do you do? What's your job? What is your path been? He could not have been nicer. And it was just, just heartwarming that, he didn't remember it, but he appreciated that he had impact and continued interest at that. And it was just a really neat moment. But those early days were very, very tough. And in this job, particularly if you're a woman, you need advocates. And he was probably my first.
Shannon, excuse the quip here. This show is called Sports Untold. That is a great Sports Untold story, how Ivan Rodriguez had your back as a young female reporter. That's just a terrific story, and it's neat that how years later you connected with him. So you just gave a heck of an answer to an early interview that you gave. So you must have just felt it was so cool to have Ivan Rodriguez tell the other guy, the lady is speaking. Come on. I mean, you must have just felt it must have been a really cool feeling.
Yeah, it was a feeling that I think everything's going to be okay. And there would be, all sorts of other instances and whatnot. But, that was the toughest time. And there's a pressure in this job. If they tell you to go get an interview, you have to go get an interview. And you can't come back empty-handed. So, I mean, it was a desperate moment for me early on. And especially going in, perhaps not as equipped as somebody who had actually gone to school for this. I mean, I was going in a different direction at the time, and at this time was trying to make a career. This is what I wanted to do, but at the same time was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to open a Starbucks so I could support trying to pursue this career. So all of that kind of added up to, never mind how intimidating a situation is for particularly back in the 90s. It's a lot. It's different right now, but it was huge, and it meant the world to me. And I think I immediately recognized it and appreciated it even more as the years went on.
Well, let me tell you something. I recommend that listeners go to my 60-second edition with Shannon Drayer. Shannon had some great stories about the beginnings of your career and how you broke into the business. Feel free to share some more of those today as well. Hey, Shannon, a little change of subject. Paul Schneiderman, the host of Sports Untold, in the 105th edition today, also on Rainier Avenue Radio. Shannon, I know you're a baseball reporter, but you're a sports fan. Do you have any thoughts on the Kraken broadcasting team so far?
Unfortunately, I haven't really taken the time. Baseball used to be you would have an off season, and I now call it the not so off season. And so I've been basically following them on social media, and I've been very intrigued about how they have incorporated an analytics aspect to it, and the way that they're reaching out to fans and trying to educate fans on the sport as well. So that is something that I need to get into a little bit more. I've heard interviews with the broadcasters, but I haven't really kind of sat down and listened to a game as of yet.
Well, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts sometimes about how your colleagues on the Kraken broadcasting team are doing. I'm enjoying the radio and TV team so far, and I'm one of these novice hockey people that's slowly enjoying and learning the game. Shannon, speaking of the Kraken, their team name is definitely getting a lot of, I guess, discussion. The Mariners played the Cleveland Guardians, formerly the Cleveland Indians, several times a year. What do you think of the new name of the Cleveland Indians, the Cleveland Guardians? It's probably not as catchy as a pro sports franchise name as the Kraken, is it?
I don't think you can do much better than the Kraken. I mean, there was immediate, excitement and just the marketing, the logos and the colors and everything else. They've knocked that out of the park. The Guardians, the thing that I appreciate about that is, A, they made the move, but B, again, and it's much more muted than what you see with the Kraken, but they, the font and the lettering that they have, very similar to what it was before. And I think that, it's one thing to start anew, it's another thing when you have an established fan base and a history. And so I like the visual. I like the G that they're using. I like the print that they're using. It's a huge undertaking. My understanding is their process involved the fans quite a bit in coming up with the name. The Guardians again, no, I don't think that is nearly as interesting or as exciting as the Kraken. I believe it means more to the Cleveland community, and that they're talking about the Guardians. I think of the bridge or the statues that they have in the city. And if that is something that I hope that they buy into, because it's a wonderful part of our Midwest. And you think about how that was kind of the center of industry for such a long time in our country, and you think about the auto industries and everything that was built, and just along those lines, the transportation and whatnot that is coming from the Midwest. I understand that a little bit, and I hope they are still rooted in that, and that is something that they identify with, closely.
Some wanted the team name to be the Cleveland Spiders, the renaming of the franchise. I saw that come up.
Sure, and that would be history again as well. It's a tricky thing, and not really liking to encounter spiders. I think maybe we've been spared from seeing that kind of logo. Not sure I want to see that on a cap or anything, like as far as like an actual arachnid. Let's just keep the bugs out of it as far as I'm concerned.
Fair enough. Go with the mythological sea creature instead.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. They're far less scary.
Gotcha. Like it. Hey, speaking of Cleveland, Shannon, as part of your job, you travel to many Major League Baseball cities, and we always hear about New York and Los Angeles, of course. A lot of Americans know what's going on in those cities. Can you mention a couple Major League cities that are not maybe the highest profile cities, or you've always enjoyed your trip to those cities? And can you mention a couple fun things to see in those cities? And Cleveland's on my mind specifically, but go ahead and...
Well, Cleveland has some of my best memories ever. That is where we were stuck for 4 days and got snowed out 4 days in a row.
Wow.
Many, many years ago. And the first game, it ended, I believe, with 2 outs in the 4th inning, so it wasn't quite official. Jose Lopez had just the most heroic at bat of all time, fighting off pitches from Paul Bird to keep him from a no-hitter at that point. While the snowflakes are coming down, he kept pointing to his eyes, I can't see. And so he is able to stay in there long enough until they call it. Yeah, and then, you were thinking, okay, well, we'll make this up tomorrow. You wake up tomorrow, throw open the curtains, and all you see is white. And for 4 days, they kept telling us, we think we're going to play today. So you kind of trudge through the snow, and the whole city had come to a stop. We're talking like 3 feet of snow. And you'd go to the park and you'd look, and they would plow like left field. And as they moved to center and right, left field would fill in again. And it was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. So we were there for 4 days. City closed down. The hotel was attached to a little mall, so there were a few things that were open, a couple of restaurants to open. There were a lot of hot cocos with other things in them in the lounge of the hotel next to the fire. And it actually kind of turned out it was the beginning of the season, and you just kept running into everybody everywhere. It was a lot of fun. But Cleveland would not be at the top of my list to visit. But if you do, there are some neat things. Downtown, there's a great alleyway that is just right outside of the basketball and the baseball arenas, and there's some fantastic restaurants in there. They do have a Michelin star kind of celebrity chef in Cleveland, and a couple of restaurants are there, and kind of a neat place to go out right there. And again, as I said, with the bridge and some of the buildings, it looks so different than it does. Obviously Midwest much older than than where we are, so you get just different architecture. It's on the lake. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum is there. That's kind of fun to see.
Been there, great place.
Yeah, you realize that rock stars are just, they're tiny. They have all the costumes, and they are all very small, but that's kind of neat. But some of the more interesting cities, Kansas City is an absolute favorite of all of ours.
Great town.
And learned that my first time and wouldn't have known it. The stadium is a little bit far out, but I love it. It's one of my favorite parks. It's pristine. They redid it about 5-6 years ago, I believe, and the fountains are still there, but it's a big open stadium, and I love going there. I don't care if it's 110. That's what it is. That it feels like what that part of the country should feel like at that time of the year. Then the city itself, you hear about the barbecue, which is fantastic. You can go to a different place or two every day and have something wonderful. The Negro Leagues Museum is there, and that is a must go every single trip. I've been there once a year for the last 20 years. And I don't think I've ever missed a trip to that. The opportunity to talk to Bob Kendrick there, who has taken care of everything there as the historian. I did get to meet Buck O'Neill my first year, which was one of the highlights of my career. But just the stories and the realizations, and it's very small, but it puts you there. It puts you in the time, and it's just wonderful. Jazz Museum is there too. Just a neat city. There's a lot to do in Kansas City. I love Chicago. That's not a hidden gem. Detroit, I have found very interesting too. It's a city that's been going there for about 20 years, and we stay out in one of the many beautiful suburbs they have there. But to watch the city, and I root for Detroit. It's been trying hard. It has been building. It's been a slow build, but there's a good kind of underground pop-up restaurant scene there. The architecture again is just absolutely, just unbelievable, and just the story behind it and seeing it really just try and pull itself up. I always appreciate going there as well. Stadium's pretty neat too, with the Tigers and whatnot. Those are just a few. I mean, I like just about everywhere that we go. Tampa's got a horrible stadium, but I kind of fell in love with St. Petersburg of all places. Just kind of sleepy and tropical, and I like that. And Cuban sandwiches are out of this world, and you get the best hamburger in the league there as well, at a bar that is owned by some former umpires. That's a lot of fun. So, I mean, we've got spots everywhere, but those are all ones that kind of surprised me when I first started traveling.
Love it. Shannon, you kind of sound like a baseball Rick Steves, kind of going through all these fun things to see in these baseball seasons. Maybe you could break into something new as part of your career here. Yeah, you really gave a great kind of tourist advisor. I spent some time in Kansas City and Cleveland, and I haven't spent any time in Detroit. I haven't been in the airport a couple times, but I enjoyed your insights about some of the major league cities you go to. So we talk about different stuff on Sports Untold, as you can tell. So, Shannon, I want to kind of fast forward here. I was going to bring this up later, but I think the timing's probably good for this subject. So I just read a New York Times article this week about Minnie Minoso, and he was a 13-time All-Star. And the article doesn't just talk about Minnie, it talks about how there's a new Golden Days special category in the Baseball Hall of Fame for players that played, I believe, in the 50s and 60s. There's also a new early baseball category. All these players were black players and weren't allowed to play in Major League Baseball before integration. So I got a couple of questions for you. By the way, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have underrated sports sections. Both those papers I think are kind of fun to read, that the sports sections are good. So a couple of questions for you is, what do you think about the Hall of Fame trying to expand the number of people coming in and maybe adding some new categories of consideration? And what do you think of the 2020 Major League Baseball decision to recognize several of the Negro leagues as being on par with the AL and NL leagues in terms of assessing baseball records? So I got a couple of questions for you that I thought about when I was reading the Minnie Minoso article in the New York Times the other day.
I think it's way beyond time that happened. I think you can choose to, we are Major League Baseball and this is what we are, but you cannot say that unless you include the Negro Leagues that that is everything that baseball has been in this country. The Negro Leagues were professional. It were professional leagues. They were professional teams. They played real schedules. They are just a huge part of the history of the game, let alone the history of this country. I mean, that's something totally different that the Negro Leagues need to be acknowledged for. But these were real baseball players. These were real baseball players that were on par with what was playing in the major leagues. These were real baseball players that should have been playing in MLB baseball at the time and were not allowed to play in MLB baseball. So to exclude them from that, I think was wrong. Was Josh Gibson the home run, the true home run king? These are things that they've got, experts and historians figuring out right now. And I think ultimately we will find that the records are not going to really impact what has already been established, because a lot of the games that were played in the Negro Leagues were barnstorming games, and they did not count as official season games. So I think there are, folks that kind of get up in arms about this shouldn't count, but a lot, absolutely records, absolutely your stats were part of the major leagues. You better believe they were. And I think that the more that we learn of the history of these players, I mean, if you love baseball, you need to know about these things. The stories are absolutely fantastic. It's an absolute, asset to the game. And for far too long, that part of the game was just undersold, undertold, I think, and it was. I mean, these are all, we know most of what we know is because of stories that were passed, and it's just it's such a rich part of this game that to include it, it wasn't going anywhere, and the stories were always there, but it deserves that acknowledgement within the game. So for that to happen, to me, it was finally, because that it should not have occurred in the first place, and they deserve this recognition, and it means a lot to a lot of people. So it's righting a wrong, I think, in putting it back as acknowledged one of the major leagues. As far as the Hall of Fame goes, they've done this for a long time. It's kind of, I think, just basically a catch-all to make sure that you get as many that should be in. And now there's a lot of debate as who should be in. Are you a small hall person, or are you a larger
Right.
Hall of Fame? And a lot of times, I think that when it comes to numbers, I think that is easy now. I think we can break down this game to an extent where you can compare people even throughout eras if you do the work. That in some aspects, I think that, well, why aren't we just throwing all the numbers into a computer and coming out, setting a mark, and you're a Hall of Famer or you're not. But there are also places in the Hall of Fame for people that were not necessarily players. You've got managers, you've got executives, and things like that. So a lot of the times these extra votes in this era committee and that era committee are mainly catching those things. I am all for continuing to vote, and as long as there is a human aspect of it, then I don't think it should just be the numbers. And I know that there's a lot of debate over, should this player, a steroid player, a controversial player, be in it. And if you're going to have humans and you're going to have an actual vote, then I think you should be allowed to vote for whatever you believe fits that criteria that they have set out there. Otherwise, and things get a little bit ugly now at Hall of Fame time. And, you may not like Kurt Schilling, but his numbers were this. Well, that's fine. But there are these, set of instructions in voting for it, which are very non-specific, and the hall won't get aggressive about further defining it. But as long as there are humans voting for it, then there should be some aspect of a very educated, a very researched opinion should matter. And if it doesn't, then there should be no voters, and they should just spit out the numbers. So to me, these eras and these committees, I think it's important that you have them, because they can go back and you can kind of reverse, then work those numbers in, and you have a different look at these players, for better and for worse for some. But there's no question that there are some that have been left out that should be in. And Buck O'Neill, who I mentioned a while ago, is on this ballot right now. And if they don't get it right this time, I can't imagine they don't get it right this time. But thanks to these committees, we do have a chance to go back and take a look and say, yeah, we didn't quite get that right. Let's do it again.
I think your points are very valid. And Shannon, I want to ask you mentioned some of the steroid players, or I should say players linked to steroids. Some of these cases are a little fuzzier, depends on the particular player and what may have occurred. Where do you stand overall? I've asked a couple other guests this question on, say, Barry Bonds and McGuire and Sosa. Do you take the view these were just great players, and when you take aside the steroids, they still were superstars? You take the view that, hey, these were violations, they shouldn't be in. What's the Shannon Drayer view on some of these steroid cases?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and point out that I'm not a member of the BBWAA, so I don't vote. So this is just my opinion. If I did vote, if there was, I would not, I'm very much against, well, there were a lot of inferences that this person did it or this person looked like he did it. But if there is enough proof, then they're not in my Hall of Fame. I'm not going to go out on that limb and say they would have been without or they were before. If they were, and it's tough because at times, there are players where, well, it wasn't necessarily breaking a rule. Again, if you're allowing humans to put their input into this, I'm not good with that. If you know that's wrong, and being around players that impacted, I mean, not only did they get records, but these players were, taking contracts from people who weren't doing it and making those players' lives a little bit tougher as well. So, but there's got to be solid proof that this person has done it. I'm very much not comfortable with that guy. Obviously was doing steroids. Well, no, he obviously, there are ways we are seeing that players are getting bigger and stronger. I don't think that you can just look at a player and say this guy is definitely doing it.
All right, Shannon, I'm going to have one follow-up on this. How about a guy like Roger Clemens? He was acquitted in the criminal proceedings against him.
Use your common sense.
Okay. I put on the legal hat on that one, Shannon. I couldn't help it.
Not good enough. If he's having stuff mailed to his wife, that's close enough for me.
Okay, gotcha. Well, your opinions are held by many. Shannon, I want to move to a few other subjects here. And I'm going through it. I don't follow the Mariners or baseball as closely as you do, the day-to-day stuff. And I'm a little completely out of my league talking to you with your knowledge base. But I go through the free agent list. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. It gets kind of overwhelming, like who may sign who and what team may get so and so. You go to different blogs and different websites. It's overwhelming. So I could ask you so many questions about this, but let me get in a couple, and I want to get your input here. Let's take Marcus Semien and Chris Bryant. If the Mariners sign Semien and had him play second, would it make sense to move Toro to third? Or if they signed Chris Bryant and he played third, would it make sense to keep Abraham Toro at second? Give me your take on the possibility of Semien and Chris Bryant coming to Seattle. Those two kind of fascinate me, those two names.
Well, Semien is definitely a target of the Mariners, and I believe Bryant is too. They had heavy interest of him at the trade deadline, and I would imagine they still do right now. I think the ideal situation is you get both a second baseman and a third baseman, and Toro is one of your bench players. I don't know that that's the direction they're going in, but that is what I would do. Jerry has set himself up with a roster that he has to have the flexibility that, they can go in so many different directions right now. And with the expectation next year that they will compete and should compete at a high level, and what I think is a fair expectation, they should make the postseason. I think if you can go big at both positions, that would be fantastic. That doesn't necessarily mean signing free agents at both. You could trade. There's been a lot of talk about this fire sale in Oakland right now. Wouldn't Matt Chapman look great at third base for a couple of years while you're waiting for Noel V. Marte? They could go in any number of directions. If they get Semien, fantastic. Put him at second. Keep going for a third baseman. If you're able to get a third baseman either in free agency, Eduardo Escobar would be another good short-term option. You could probably do a 2-3 year contract with him and again be ready for Noel V. Marte. I would be looking probably to improve both positions, in which case then you've got, a pretty good utility player that you can continue to develop. And I don't know that I would also, shouldn't say this because I'm going to say this on my own podcast next week, and I haven't as of yet. When they traded for Toro, the Mariners were immediately approached by other teams that were thinking that they were going to flip him because it didn't make a lot of sense. If he's attractive to other teams too, he might be somebody that can help you get that starting pitcher that you're looking for. If you've got a team that is looking for young players, that are still inexpensive but major league ready. He still fits that mode. So I don't know how this is going to shake out. But if you need to put him at third, you can put him at third. If you need to put him at second, you can put him at second. That's not optimal. He's still learning that position. If he had another year where, hey, we're still figuring things out, we're still growing young players, I'd feel pretty good about that. But next year is the year that they're really supposed to go. So I would prefer to see a little bit more established options at either place.
Are labor issues going to complicate free agent signings this season, Shannon?
We're not seeing it as of yet. I mean, the free agent market has started out kind of fast and furious, more so than I think people expected. Now, it's been on the starting pitching side, and you're seeing teams not taking any chances, and some big names flying off the board already, which I think is a little bit of a surprise. Jerry Dipoto didn't seem to think it was a surprise, and I don't know that Verlander and
Snygard, I think, got signed today, right? Syndergaard, sorry.
I don't know that Syndergaard and Verlander were targets for Jerry Dipoto. Eduardo Rodriguez would have been great, but I think that what we're going to see is we are probably going to see a lockout, which means everything stops, and you're going to see the free agency in a much smaller, compressed at the end. And what is interesting is in years past, we've seen most of the big names kind of go in a 2-week period in January, late January, or February, or early February. Now we're seeing some of them sign pretty quickly. So it's tough to see what the approach the free agents are taking, if they would rather. But we're also seeing big deals thrown at them right now that they'd be insane to turn down. So it's going to be different. So it's already impacted it, and I think the biggest impact that you will see is if we get to December 2 and there's a shutdown, it's going to be fast and furious when it reopens.
Very true. Shannon, 2 ex-Mariners are getting some attention in the free agency market this year. Nelson Cruz and Chris Taylor. Do you see any chance we could get one of the aforementioned back or both of them back?
No chance with Nelson Cruz. We love Nelson Cruz. Yeah. It's in some ways a shame that they didn't keep him through the rebuild. I sometimes wonder if he could have helped speed things up a little bit, although 3 years is pretty quick, especially when 1 year was, 2-month season. And absolutely, you're not going to find a finer person in that clubhouse, but they're not going to hold a spot at, limit the designated hitter spot to just the designated hitter. They need that spot to rotate other players through. What I see is they probably pick up another outfielder, and then you've got a 4th outfielder that is not like so much a 4th outfielder, but an actual contributor, and you're using that DH spot to get Mitch Haniger days off again, because that worked out very well this year. And if Kyle Lewis is some form of healthy, he's probably going to need DH days too. So you can't bring in a DH that is only going to be able to DH, and unfortunately that's what Nelson is right now. Chris Taylor is a possibility. I don't think he is at the top of their list, but I think that is one that they will monitor. It's going to be interesting to see what he is going to get, because he's in his early 30s right now. He's coming off a season. He had the postseason heroics, but he was not as good at the plate this year as he has been in the past. But he does have that versatility that Jerry Dipoto absolutely, values. So I would imagine, is of interest.
Any shot the Mariners could get maybe a Max Scherzer or a Clayton Kershaw or a Marcus Stroman, or am I in Fantasyland?
It's funny. We had Jeff Passan on the station on 710 about a month ago, and he said the Mariners should go all in on Max Scherzer. And at his age, it's going to be the short-term, very high dollar amount. But with what we're seeing with the 2 Tommy John aces going for $25 million, that what Scherzer looking at, 30, 35, even a 2-3 year contract, that's a lot. What's got me nervous about that, and I think, it probably was that they had the short season last year and it was getting toward the end of the season, but he didn't make it through the postseason. And to me, I would have questions. He's getting up there in age. It probably wasn't anything, but when you're putting out that kind of dollar amount, then I want to know more. When Verlander was still available, I would have taken Justin Verlander over Max Scherzer, because Verlander has had the surgery. It's happened. That that ligament is snapped. It's been fixed. He's ready to go. And I'm not quite sure what's going on with Scherzer right now, although I'm not hearing as much concern around baseball for it, but that's just me. I think I know Stroman is somebody that they've liked for a long time. I would imagine they'd make a run at it.
Shannon, I'm gonna Paul Steinman of Sports Untold, the 105th edition, with Clubhouse ESPN reporter of the Mariners, Shannon Drayer, ESPN Seattle. Shannon, I'm gonna back up with two questions. These are two of my favorite questions. I've been asking guests these questions. This is about late 2019. I want to ask you who's a living sports figure you would love to interview and have a conversation with, and who's a deceased sports figure in history you would have loved to have interviewed and had a conversation with. If you want, I give you a few names I've received from guests. If you want to hear a couple names.
Sure.
Okay, well here's a few answers I received on the living sports figure question. These are just my two favorite questions. I can't help but ask them. Kenny Anderson, former NBA player, answered Joe Montana. Your colleague Dave Sims answered Sandy Koufax. Michael Jordan's name has come up. Serena Williams, Simone Biles, Charles Barkley, Tiger Woods, Bill Russell, Willie Mays. Grosby answered Floyd Mayweather. One really interesting answer I got. That was for the deceased sports figure question. Well, we'll start with the living one first. I want to get your take on who's a living sport. It could be a manager, an owner. Who would you select, whether in baseball or outside of baseball? Who would you just love to have a sit down with and just pick their brain?
Oh, that's a tough one. The deceased is a lot easier.
Well, let's go with the deceased first. I've received Dean Smith, Walter Payton, Hank Aaron, Muhammad Ali. The famous attorney Alan Dershowitz answered he'd love to interview Josh Gibson, one of the famous Negro baseball players. Here's another answer I got that's unique. Mark Pattison, former UW football player, former NFL player. He's a mountain climber. He answered Sir Edmund Hillary, one of the first people to climb Mount Everest. So I've got some just great answers. So who's a deceased sports person in history you would have loved to have a sit down with?
Well, I was going to go Ali on that one.
Okay.
Just fascinating. I was in the clubhouse when he came through, I want to say in 2004 in spring training. And that was one of the few where you feel it in the room. He didn't say much, but the presence, you absolutely felt it. I think it would be amazing to sit down with him. And I'd also throw in Satchel Paige into that.
Great name.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the living side, this is terrible because it's one that I can have.
We can get back to it.
Okay. I've got one, and it's one that I've had and I can continue to have, but Ichiro is one of my absolute favorite people to talk to. And again, he sometimes has that presence as well, which is really something, but fascinating person, different way of looking at things, incredibly thoughtful. Really enjoy talking with him.
Ian Furness answered Russell Wilson that question, kind of similar. You both cover the respective teams, so that's interesting that you mentioned Ichiro. And I'm sure you're happy you got in the Mariners Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah. No, it's, that obviously was a no-brainer. But he's been so fun to watch this year, and he is a coach with the team. He does not travel with the team, and when the team is on the road, he is at the field every day. And we were at the field, and we had to do road broadcasts from home this year. And every day we would see him go out there and go through his routine and do his running and do his stretching and play catch. And when there were rehab guys there, he would do their routines with them. And to the point where when there were some pitchers that were rehabbing, he would play catch with them, and he decided that the pitchers would be more comfortable if he played catch with them as a catcher. So he ordered all the catching gear and started actually catching them a little bit in the bullpens as they were coming back. And one of the neatest things to see was, because let's remember that this group of Mariners right now, for the most part, didn't play. He was not a teammate of theirs, and for a lot of them, he was somebody they looked up to and watched when they were growing up. So there's been some separation there, and there's some awe. He would have conversations with guys. We'd look down on the field, and you would be looking. He'd be out there talking to a reliever, and you're like, "What are Ichiro and Eric Swanson talking about for 45 minutes?" And just not even a hitter. And talked to Eric about it, and he just said it's one of the best conversations I've had in my life. And we were a lot of just talking about life and a lot of things. But it's great to see the appreciation, the dedication of Ichiro, and the commitment to these young players, but also the appreciation. It's been so fun to watch.
And it's inevitable he'll be in the Baseball Hall of Fame in a couple of years. Shannon, speaking of the Mariners Hall of Fame, do you think Kyle Seager has a case to be in one day? There's, I think, 10 Mariners in there, including Dave Niehaus. Do you think Seager has a good case to get in one day?
Yeah, I mean, they've called him a future Mariners Hall of Famer for a while. And, look at a 10-year Mariner player, and he is on the top of most of the list on the Mariners. So I think that he is somebody that we'll see. It's unfortunate that, like Felix, we didn't see him in a postseason as a Mariner. That's tough, but he was a huge part of so much that went on with trying to get this team to where they are right now. And I think anytime you have a player that you basically saw grow up in the organization, and he did, there's a little something extra there. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw him there someday.
I hope so. Can I get 2 more questions with you, Shannon? Is that okay?
Sure.
Great. Speaking of Kyle Seager, what do you think of the decision by the Mariners to not exercise his option?
I think it made a lot of sense. I think that, unfortunately, one of the things is he kind of hit more home runs and got more plate appearances. His number went up. The contract had escalators in it, and it went up to $20 million. It could have been anywhere from 15 to 20, and that's a big chunk of change right there for that player. I think that he meant so much to them in terms of leadership. You saw that in the final day from his teammates. A lot of tears when he left. But I think that one of the biggest things in kind of moving on at this point was, even if he were going to pick up that option, it was going to be just 1 year. And it's time to get something going at that position moving forward with a younger player or a player that you can have there for 2 to 3 years. So along those lines, it's a tough move. I think they have an opportunity to, upgrade in production a little bit there. And I think that's important, but it just was not a good fit for 1 year.
Where do you think he's going to end up, Seager? Any predictions?
No, I know the Rangers are looking at his brother really closely right now, and Kyle has always been a Ranger killer. That might be a little bit of intrigue if they were able to get both Seager brothers there. Somewhere back east, I think especially if I don't know if a team is going to look at him like a contending team, if they're going to look at him absolutely every day. He played every day, but I know that he's had some interest, in being a little bit closer to home on the East Coast. If you see something there, so I don't know. I think this is one of those ones that'll be a little bit of a later signing, but maybe keep your eye on Texas.
We'll find out. Well, here's my final question for you today, Shannon. It's been a lot of fun having you back on Sports Untold, my podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio. What is Shannon Drayer's favorite sports movie?
Oh, okay, there are 2.
I know you have an acting background too, so.
There are 2, and I have personal connections to both, which has a lot to do with it. Field of Dreams, and my mom is from Iowa and my dad is from Indiana, which might be a hint as what my other favorite is. And I grew up mostly in Illinois. So we literally had a cornfield in our backyard when I was growing up. And so the possibility that there could be ghosts of baseball players out in the cornfield, I absolutely buy into that. That absolutely could happen as far as I'm concerned. Those are things that you thought about, the hot summer nights with the fireflies and everything else. And we played, out there. So that had just huge meaning, along with the message. I mean, it was a feel good. If you love baseball, everything you love about the game, I think was probably
great movie.
In that movie. But the nearest and dearest thing to me in that movie is at the very end, as they're getting ready to roll credits, as they pan away from the field, you see cars driving out to the field, and they get smaller and smaller, and all you see are little lights driving out to the field as they pan further and further back. My grandparents were driving one of those cars. They lived in Dubuque, Iowa at the time, and this is before all the CGI and just filling in the blanks in the movies. They actually needed cars to drive out there, so the production assistants went to the clubs and churches and whatnot. And hey, if you're not doing anything on Sunday night, drive your car out into the middle of the cornfield. We could use your help. And so they're in one of those cars, and that means everything to me. The other is Hoosiers, which is an absolutely beautiful movie, and that movie just just pulls at the heartstrings for me. The gym looks like the gym that my elementary school had. Just the fall scenes are everything that I love. The plowed under fields, the landscapes, everything I loved about the Midwest I see in that film. And then the actual story is my dad grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He's told me those stories, well before the movie. I've heard those stories. And so that movie means everything to me. And to hear that they actually put together, there was about an hour of deleted scenes, edited scenes for time that were taken out of it. They've actually put it all back together.
I didn't know that.
They had a one-time only at the gym. You can visit the gym. It's like a Field of Dreams type situation. You can visit the Hickory Gym. And they had a one-time lottery. It was like a $5 ticket. 200 people got to go in and watch the film at the gym. And it was the only time that they were going to show it, the full, putting it all back together. And
so neat.
Now they're looking at actually, can we legally get this? Can we get the rights to it and redistribute the entire film the way it was meant to be seen, which will be over 3 hours. But I'm like, oh, heck yes, go for it.
And by the way, Gene Hackman, who played the coach in that movie, has retired from acting about a decade ago. Completely got out. There's so many actors and actresses that go in. I think we talked about this on my show last time. That keep acting until the day they go. But Hackman got out quite a few years ago. So, well, those are two great movies. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for coming back on Sports Untold. Always have fun chatting with you, and have a great baseball off season. And great to have you back on my podcast.
I appreciate it. Always fun to talk with you, Paul.
You too. Thanks, Shannon. Stay safe.